Marketers speak of inbound and outbound marketing, and what they're really getting at is the degree of targeting they use to reach an audience. Something similar occurs within thought leadership, where instead of broadcasting to many, it's narrowcast to a target audience, or even delivered as bespoke thought couture to a single individual. Today, in a special episode, I sit down with my fellow co-host, Peter Winick. If you follow this podcast, you know him as the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. When Peter is in the podcast host chair, he interviews independent thought leadership practitioners. I'm Bill Sherman, and this is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Ready? Let's begin. Hey, Peter, welcome to the show.
It's nice to be on this side of the mic. Or
exactly. Yeah. So I wanted to sit down with you and have a conversation about thought leadership from the perspective of inbound versus outbound. And I know a lot of folks think about it from a marketing perspective, but I know we've used these terms to talk about it in terms of thought leadership. So maybe you want to kick it off and sort of distinguish where marketing and thought leadership are different in terms of inbound, outbound.
So there's a parallel, but there's a difference. So traditional marketing, you have branding, you have campaigns, you have call to actions, you have all these things. Not all thought leadership falls under those. Some does, right? Some do. So there are places to put your thought leadership out there. And you say, well, why am I putting this piece of thought leadership in this modality out at this point in time? Well, it could be somewhat general. I need to have my voice out there. It would be more of a branding or an awareness, et cetera. And then you move all the way down to the other end of the spectrum, creating bespoke content that's really targeted, very, very targeted to a specific audience. That audience could be one. It doesn't have to be massive, right? To get a reaction that you're really looking for.
Right. And so one of the big differences on that is how are you putting the content out there? In sort of the classic inbound approach, you're putting it out there in the hope that the right person will come across it, read it and say, oh, that's interesting. We need to talk to these folks, or we need to adopt this idea. But on the outbound approach, it's almost white glove, valet, sort of concierge level service where you're taking an idea and saying, hey, here's an idea that I think you need now to help you either deal with something that you're dealing with now or soon in your future, right? It's a very personalized.
Yeah. So I would think a couple of other variables are, timeless versus timely, right? Yeah. So certain elements of anyone's thought leadership are fairly universal, don't really change over time, or, here's my model, here's my framework, here's my definitions, et cetera. But customizing it to you, why am I reaching out to Bill today to explain to him how I can help him with some sort of an intervention based on my models, based on something I know about you? You just went through a merger, you're publishing a book. There's something going on that I know I can be super duper helpful and need to put that to light to you and be clear about that.
There's almost a responding to, well, if it would be crisis sort of management would be a piece, right? As one opportunity where you could look and say, okay, there is an issue which has gone from someday maybe to white hot, right?
Yeah. So even look at COVID now. So there have been a bunch of domain experts in remote work from home. I'm thinking like the guys from 37 Signals. I'm drawing a blank, but there's another consultancy in the Midwest that's always done work from home. Then all of a sudden everybody goes through COVID, and guess what? Everybody's working remotely and whatever. Mm-hmm. Those things just become exponentially more relevant due to external factors. So some of it is, there's nothing wrong with being opportunistic, meaning, when is the demand changing? Why are more people having this conversation? We're having a lot of conversation now. I was just talking to someone the other day, what's one of the outcomes of the quote, great resignation? Well, the war for talent needs to be fought in non-traditional places, neurodiverse or disabled, et cetera, where we've always looked in those places for talent. But now we really, really, really need to look in those places for talent, and organizations need to be honest with themselves and say, we kind of don't know really how to do that all that well. Who else can help us and hold our hand?
And so I think some of the examples that you've been showing is that there is an opportunity to deliver an idea when the audience is ready for it.
Yeah, and that's really the bane of many thought leaders is if you look at, supply and demand. Hey, I've always got the supply. I'm always willing to help you. I always have the resources to help you. It's hard to predict in certain things where the demand is at. So you have a lot of amazing conversations with a lot of clients, but dot 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 competing agendas, time is just not making it to the top 3 list. How do you as a thought leader constantly keep your radar out there to go, is there something going on that would make me more important or less important based on things that are beyond my control?
Yeah. And so you have to keep your sort of antenna out there. But I think also you can be proactive and you can say, okay, who are the most important people that if they leaned into this idea, if they responded in the way that I want them to act, my world would change, the world would change.
So I think that's a great point, Bill. And I think what happens is it's sometimes far easier to use mass marketing strategies but they're not effective. So we see this in our work all the time. Someone puts a book out and it's on leadership. And then, lots and lots and lots and lots of people could benefit from a new perspective or a better perspective on leadership. That's all fine and dandy, but your question is really, can we get them to a place to say, let's identify 100 people, not fantasy people, by name, by title, by function, by company, by whatever, that if we got this book in their hands and they took some sort of an action, whatever that action might be, could be a game changer. And this to me is sort of the hand-to-hand combat of thought leadership, where it doesn't happen with newly minted managers. That's a vague, amorphous group of people. But who's in charge of leadership development for newly minted managers at technology companies with over 100,000 people? There aren't millions of those people, probably dozens, maybe hundreds. They're not millions. But once you can get it down to manageable numbers, you can find them. You can get it out to them. You can put it in their hands and show them why I wrote this book for you.
So a couple weeks ago in the United States, there was the Major League Baseball did the Field of Dreams baseball game based on the film with Kevin Costner. And the whole mantra of Field of Dreams was, if you build it, they will come. And I think a lot of thought leadership is sort of based optimistically on, if I have smart ideas, the right people will come. Well,
yeah, it's a great movie. It's a god awful strategy.
Yeah, exactly. And so you and I have joked over the years that thought leadership is the art of being deeply irrelevant to 99.99% of the world. But that 0.01% that of the world who needs to hear your message, that it's timely for, go be relevant to them.
Yeah, and I think that's right, because a lot of marketing, not to beat up on marketing, because marketers do a lot of things really well, are marketing consumer-based products that have such a wide appeal. Think about paper towels, think about food products, think about the things in your pantry and kitchen. Yes, there's, generic pasta, and then there's gluten-free, there's ranges there, but pasta by and large is pasta. And that's a mass market appeal. The market for that is, I don't know, whatever it is, 70% of the population eat pasta or whatever. It's a big number. I think thought leaders need to be honest with themselves. And once they come to the realization, like, you know what? I'm irrelevant to so many, and thank goodness, because I can focus my energies on that tiny, tiny, tiny percentage that I'm incredibly relevant to. And that's what I need to stay up late at night figuring out how to get to them, how to be more relevant to them, how to expose my ideas to them, how to have conversations with them.
Well, and I think it shapes also the conversations you have, the assets that you create when you focus on that 100, 150 people. You're not trying to create for the least common denominator where everyone is a potential audience member. You accept that they're going to look at it and go right by.
Yeah, and I think, you and I had an interesting conversation with the group the other day about, is the age of white papers over? I don't think it's over, but I think the reality is, when you look at what some big professional services firms do, they invest a lot of money, energy, effort, time, and resources into these amazingly well done, well written, well researched, beautiful graphics, 80-page white papers. But they don't ask themselves the questions: who's reading this? What is the expected outcome? Are there different versions of the thought leadership that can be extracted from this investment? Be that an executive summary, be that an infographic, be that an assessment tool, like whatever. It's like white paper, one size fits all. I like a good white paper now and then. I can tell you in the last 5 years, there's about one or two that I actually look out for on a regular basis. The rest, I would rather have like some sort of quick infographic USA Today chart that I can go, oh, that's interesting. And then maybe I'll dive in deeper.
Well, and I think you speak to something that even on the people who are avid readers, and I know you and I fall into that category, we were diving through books on a regular basis. We don't want the 40 to 50 page white paper as our first touch point with an idea.
Yeah. And I think that's right. I think that, why is it so hard to sell books today? The world according to me. What do I know, right? Well, I don't care about the 20 or 30 bucks. I mean, geez, we waste more than that on a daily basis on more frivolous things. The exchange is I'm committing to 6 to 8 hours of my life. Well, that's incredibly valuable, right? So if I can get a kernel of an idea from a 3-minute interaction with a graphic or something, that's where I'd start, because it's a low exchange rate, like 3 minutes of my time, whatever. I can waste that on TikTok. Then you move up and go, wow, that's really interesting. What else do you got for me? Oh, here's some articles you did. What else do you have for me? And then maybe it's a buildup to the book. I think you and I are odd birds in that in many instances our default in the book, but that's not how most people sort of interact with thought leadership and content today.
Well, and I think if you're the person who's responsible for developing the ideas and you're creating them or you're nurturing them as a curator, it almost feels cheapening the idea to turn it into an infographic because you see it all in its complexity and its nuance.
I think some of that is cultural. If you come from an academic bent, you sort of, roll your eyes and look down your nose at, an infographic. Like it needs to be a research paper with 87 pages of footnotes. Or, if you were a former McKinsey consultant, you sort of roll your eyes at that and say, oh, we never could have delivered that to a client. Well, it's kind of a little bit of time to get over yourself, right? And realize that people are time starved. Do you want to get my attention or do you not? Because if you only come in one flavor, which is give me 8 hours of your time before you've justified my willingness to make that investment, I'm going to move on to the next thing.
If you are enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about the podcast, please leave a 5-star review and share it with your friends. We are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all major platforms, as well as at leveragingthoughtleadership.com. Yeah, and so you have to recognize that no matter who your audience is, they're being bombarded by so many messages because of social media, marketing, et cetera.
Right.
You've got to find a way to signal to them quickly, hey, this might be something that you want to explore further. It doesn't matter how good your message is, whether it's something the world needs or it's going to make the world better for a group or an individual. It could be the most transformative. But if you're not getting people's attention, you've failed with the idea.
Yeah, and a lot of that is not just, I think oftentimes thought leaders get a little bit high on their own fumes. They're so passionate and so in love with it, and they're so close to it and so deep in it that they need to catch their breath and say, wait a minute, the reason Bill should spend some time with my work is that this is what it will do to make his life better, to solve a problem that he's wrestling with, to take him to a place that he's having troubles with. And I think it's harder to make those connections. Like, who benefits the most from this? What is the pain, suffering, whatever that it alleviates? What does it replace? What does it do better than a current situation? And really think about those things strategically, which is obviously a big part of where you and I spend our days.
Well, and I think the place that gets exciting is when you can put yourself into the shoes of someone else and you can think about what is their day like. And the best way I know of that is go have conversations with people. Don't think of a target audience as just this abstract, amorphous thing that you put content out for them to read.
Yep.
Instead, write for people, create ideas for people that you know, and go have conversations with them. And then ask them, hey, what did you think of this? Was it worth your time?
Yeah, I think the highest compliment anyone could get on a piece of thought leadership they put out there, whether that's a video, a blog, an article, whatever, is when someone says, oh my God, you did this just for me. It feels to me as if you wrote this or created this piece just for me. And in many instances, that could be true. Saying, yeah, based on, I mean, you and I sort of do this all the time, based on real-time things that we're seeing with real clients, we'll extrapolate, change names to protect the innocent or the guilty and put it out there. And then you find out like 50 other people had the same problem, right?
Mhm.
There's usually things that happen in pattern.
Well, and that's something that you and I have learned coming off of all the conversations that we have, right? It's easy to take a note at the end of a conversation and say, oh, I've answered that question several times before. Let me create a piece around that. Because if I've answered that once or twice and I found a good explanation or a good way of bringing that idea to life, that could be a video, that could be a blog post, that could be a tweet. There is so much content that comes out of the
Yeah.
conversations you have with your clients and customers.
Yeah. I think the other thing is to be honest enough or self-aware enough or introspective enough to realize you, as are everyone else, are the worst judge of what you put out there relative to what will stick. Right. Sometimes
Mhm.
we work on something. Oh my, wow, this is it. This is going to be the bomb. Wow, this is going to change the world. And you put it out there and no one has any interest in it. And then there are
Well,
other times
and
you put
like you
something
said
out there and it's
before,
like,
you get a response of yawns and you're like, but this is the greatest answer. This is what the world needs. And everybody's looking anywhere but your idea.
yeah. So they will tell you by inaction, like if it's not getting a response. Now, it doesn't mean one and done. Maybe there's some tweaking, modification, and you put it out the wrong time, whatever. But by and large, if you put out something you think was the greatest thing, and it doesn't work, it's not the greatest thing. Conversely, occasionally you put out something, you go, you know what, I'm almost embarrassed to put my name on that, or this is sort of silly, or I could do better. And you put it out there, and that's the thing that sticks. And you're like, oh, but that's so sophomore or juvenile, or I could do better. It's like, no, no, no. The market will tell you when you've hit a nerve, when you've done something that resonates, and you have to stay there and separate your ego, your identity from the idea.
Hmm. And other times, if you have an idea that you're passionate about, but the world isn't picking it up, that's a time where you say, okay, I can continue to beat with a sledgehammer, or I can get deeper into my audience's head and figure out what is it that they will resonate with? What do they need before they'll connect and they'll see the importance that I see?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think there's a time for grit and stubbornness and perseverance, and then there's a time to listen and
Yes.
respond. And I don't know what that time is. I can tell you, I've seen clients spend 10 years fighting the battle they shouldn't have fought and should have
Hmm.
given up earlier, and I've seen others quit too soon.
Yeah.
Because they didn't get that immediate sugar high.
So, what sort of, and I want to riff with you on this in terms of allocation, in terms of how much of your time should you be spending putting content out there in sort of an inbound way where you're putting content out into the world and planting those seeds for people to find you and discover you. But then how much time should you be spending on that direct outreach with ideas?
I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that. So I think it depends on your strategy and your business model. So, for example, if your business model is I provide high ticket coaches to very few over a period of time, I'm a high end advisor coach, et cetera. You're doing a small number of transactions at a high value, right? So that's
Hmm.
different than I have an assessment tool or video based training system or something like that that has more of a mass appeal where I'm doing high ticket, low value transactions. So I think it's a function of your business model, your distribution model, where your product roadmap is, et cetera. But I think that if you're spending all your time on outbound and you're getting a yield, that's okay. I would argue that you should shift, a good chunk of those resources the other way, right? So if you're
Right.
dominant one side, there should be some level of a balance, and that's also a function of how long you've been at it. So in the beginning, if you're of your journey as a thought leader, you got to do a lot of outbound to put your flags out there so people sort of have it. And oftentimes that just gives people more reason to believe in you, right? So they see something that you wrote, and if it's one piece of brilliance backed up by nothing, you're like, oh, okay. But if you've got a library of more things, that's helpful as well.
So you talk about that if you're early in your career, getting people or early in your career with the ideas as a thought leadership practitioner, right? The reintroductory process. You may have known me as the engineer or the trainer or the leadership coach or the company that did X, Y, and Z, but we have a new stake in the ground and we
Yeah.
need to tell
Yeah.
you about that, right?
Yeah. No,
So,
that's huge. So, I mean, for a lot of people, their expertise comes from something else, right? So I was a world-class salesperson in IT and sold zillion-dollar deals, or I led a sales group at these type of organizations. And then you have to be honest and say, okay, you woke up one day and said, now I'm going to be a thought leader in sales. I'm going to be an author. I'm going to be a speaker and whatever. Well, no one got the letter, right? No one got the announcement that Peter is no longer a high-performing sales leader in technology. He now identifies as X, right? So the
right.
burden is on you to reactivate and reintroduce yourself to your market, to your network. I know you know me as X, but let me give you an update on what I'm doing and why I'm updating you on that. And some of it will make sense. Like, well, of course it would make sense for me to update Bill because his criteria are similar to my client avatars. But there's also lots and lots of other people that we don't even know what they're up to these days that we should make aware because you have equity in the relationship. They know you, they trust you from other things, but now they have a different reason to ring you up.
Exactly. And so that first sort of practice on the outbound, you don't have to go after your ideal customer or your ideal person for thought leadership. You can reach out to the people who know you and say, I'm going down this road and let me tell you about it. Right. And that initial conversation prepares you for doing that high touch outbound work that's necessary when you're focusing on
Sure.
individuals.
And it's not just let me tell you about it, because
Mhm.
oftentimes the response to that will be, hey, Bill, that's awesome. I'm glad you're writing a book.
Right.
Congratulations. How can I help you? And the how
Mhm.
can I help you is it's not as benign as, hey, how are you feeling today? Which means I don't really care. It's sort of a pleasantry. But
Mhm.
the how can I help you is a sincere motion. But if you don't have a way to specifically answer that tailored to me, you can say, well, Peter, actually, the way you can help me is I know your network has a lot of people that look like this, and I'm looking to talk to people like this. Would it be okay if you made an introduction to Charlie, Fred, and Bill? Because I'd like to talk to them. Like, oh, geez, that's an easy thing to do. Happy to do that for you.
And that specificity of the ask. I think that's something that when you get into that direct outreach, you always have to know. And very much like a sales minded sort of approach, you're not selling, asking for dollars necessarily with thought leadership, but you're selling an idea. And even if that person isn't a buyer of the idea, they may be a connector or an influencer.
Yeah,
And
and I think there's a specificity of the ask and an appropriateness of the ask. If I were to ask you to introduce me to a friend or a colleague that I know you have a relationship with, because I would like to meet with them, and assuming you respect me and are on my team, you'd be glad to do this. But here's the flip side of that happens to me all the time that annoys me. I'll get either in the mail or email a manuscript from someone that either I don't know or I haven't talked to in 15 years, and the request will be, hey, my book's coming out in a couple of months. Could you read this and give me your feedback or whatever? It's like, no, actually, I'm not going to spend 8 hours of my life. Like, I don't, I remember we had a coffee at a conference 12 years ago in Scottsdale. I haven't talked to you since. And now
Mhm.
you're asking for 8 to 10 hours of my life. Like, that just doesn't
There's
seem,
a proportionality, and it wasn't worth a
yeah,
phone call for them to say, hey, can I send you this, right? And you say, yeah,
yeah,
sure, send it over and I'll take a look.
yeah. And why? And I know this is a big ask, or, maybe start with, I'm writing, could you read the head, the first chapter, or here's a summary of it. Maybe this would
Hmm.
be of interest to you. Like, don't shove 300 pages down my throat and ask me, not only ask me to read it, but to give you feedback and like, that's 2 or 3 days of my life if I'm actually going to do that thoughtfully.
Absolutely. So we could continue talking about outbound thought leadership work for a long time, but I think we should leave it here. Thanks for joining, Peter.
Thank you.
If you're interested in organizational thought leadership, then I invite you to subscribe to the OrgTL newsletter. Each month, we talk about the people who create, curate, and deploy thought leadership on behalf of their organizations. Go to the website orgtl.com and choose Join Our Newsletter. I'll leave a link to the website as well as my LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing what you thought of the show.